Okay, so I have a hypothesis that there is a relatively small basket of things that people do on a pretty regular basis that cause maximum damage. I'll give you a couple examples and then
Okay.
give me your basket. So if you let me pull a few levers in somebody's life, I think I can change it forever and for the better. I'm going to control their sleep. I'm going to control their access to the sun. And if I'm going to stop at 3, I would control their sugar intake. Their blood glucose levels is actually what I would steer by.
Yeah.
There's a few more that are pretty high impact, but I'll stop there. What do you agree that there is in terms of common, that there's a relatively small basket? And if so, what's in the basket?
First of all, I would absolutely believe those 3 are certainly in the top 5. I might add 2 more, but yes. What's interesting, I was just talking to my wife about this. As I sort of travel around the world, I meet with some of the world's leading anti-aging, longevity, biohacking experts. I mean, a lot of these researchers that are doing fascinating things in gene therapy. I go to a lot of retreats and events. What's really astounding, Tom, is that the science of biooptimization is coming full circle. Meaning we're just getting back to the basics, which is exactly what you're saying. Forget the fancy, equipment. Forget this rare Amazon root that this company has that's patented and licensed and trademarked, and it, they skin it and boil it and dry it, and this is the secret elixir to life. It's back to the basics. The further we get away from the basics, the sicker we become.
Can you break out what are the basics?
So the basics are what we get from Mother Nature, which are 3 things. We get light from the sun. So I'm completely with you on light. We get oxygen from the air. Most of us are not breathing properly anymore. Sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality. We're not moving. We're not getting enough oxygen into our bodies, which is why I'm a huge fan of breath work in the morning. And we're not touching the surface of the earth.
The whole time I've been researching you, I'm like, Jesus, I never, and I mean never, am barefoot unless I'm on vacation, which is like once a year.
Bro, you need to get a PEMF mat.
Yeah.
Or start touching the surface of the earth.
That's too far away.
It's right outside your door.
Not really. Will my driveway count? My driveway is artificial grass and cement.
You don't have any grass on the side.
We have like one little patch. I wondered if that would count.
Yeah.
Because
you don't need to move. Just touch.
But how deep does that have to be? Like, I'm sure it's sitting over tanks and things like that, so it's not
probably
going to be super deep.
But I mean, look, you can get a Gauss meter and check it. But I mean, most soil, dirt, grass, sand is perfect. If not, when people are like, oh, I don't want to buy all this fancy equipment. There's no fancy equipment you have to buy if you can touch the surface of the earth. If for whatever reason you can't touch the surface of the earth, then invest in something like a PEMF mat, pulse electromagnetic field, that puts low Gauss current through the body and mimics the magnetic field of the earth. So those are some of the basics. Sunlight, breathing oxygen, and contacting the surface of the earth. And I am absolutely with you. The 3rd or 4th would be glycemic control, blood sugar control. Sugar is the root of all evil. The Bible should say sugar is the root of all evil, not the love of money, right? Because I don't think people are dying because they love money, but they are dying from blood sugar. And in my entire...
Is it just that they're overeating? Sugar makes them overeat, and that's the problem?
No.
Or sugar itself, even in small quantities, is going to be problematic?
It's the fact that sugar is hidden in everything now. Our sugar consumption since 1964 has gone up 400-fold. Not 400, it's gone up because it's in everything. And then we had a massive war in the 90s on fat, which was like the worst thing that ever happened to the food pyramid, was to have this massive war on fats in general and saturated fats and natural oils. And, we started to replace everything with processed foods and sugars, which really spike your insulin. And, we know now, for example, that a lot of mental and psychiatric illness has its root in blood sugar. For example, we know now that Alzheimer's disease is type 3 diabetes. It's insulin resistance in the brain, right? I mean, the brain is so crack addicted to sugar that it secretes its own insulin, right? Most even physicians think, no, the pancreas is the only place that beta cells, the islets in the pancreas is the only place that insulin's made. That's not true. The brain makes its own insulin. It is crack addicted to sugar. And when the brain wants sugar, the brain gets sugar, right? The brain's nasty. It's like the little Kim Jong-un of dictators. It just sits up there and it takes everything for itself. If it wants calcium, it'll leach it from the bones. If it wants amino acids, it'll strip it from lean muscle. And if it wants sugar, it'll activate a receptor on the back of the tongue called the RF1A2 receptor, which also provides a dopamine ding for giving it sugar. But the trick is you have to swallow, right? So in order, we swallow these sweet products and it gives us a dopamine reward. In fact, if you look at the genesis of most artificial sweeteners, only a fraction of the chemical sweetener is actually designed to meet the taste of the sweetener. The entirety of the rest of those chemicals are designed to ding the dopamine receptor.
Whoa.
Which is why artificial sweeteners are so addictive. This is why you know people that drink 12, I'm not saying you know, but most of us know somebody that'll drink like 6, 8, 10, Diet Cokes in a day.
Bro, I used to drink 3 full-sized cans of Monster, zero calorie, but
Right.
artificial sweeteners out the ass, plus 1 to 3 Diet Cokes. And that was obviously peak anxiety. I didn't yet understand that diet could play a role in that. Yeah, the bad news is I got lean as hell. It was awesome, and it was how I managed my hunger. And P.S., they taste amazing.
Yeah.
But this is my whole thesis, is that you're getting one thing out of all these things you do that damage your physiology. But if you understand that there's like a trade-off, like Monday through Friday, I don't allow myself to drink Diet Coke. On Saturday, I'll have half a Diet Coke, and on Sunday, I'll have half a Diet Coke. Not because I think it's good for me, because I think it tastes good.
Right.
But because I understand that there's a knock-on effect of everything I put in my mouth or don't put in my mouth or on my skin or, on and on, you start to do a different calculus. And
I agree.
It's that calculus that I think is so important to understand if you're trying to really optimize.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. And the truth is that most of us are walking around at about 50 or 60% of our true state of normal. And we are very likely just a few nutrients away from being completely optimal. But we just don't know what those nutrients are. You want to talk about magic things happening in the human body. Magic happens in the human body when you give it the raw material it needs to do its job. And if we start with the understanding, the very truthful understanding, that there's not a single compound known to mankind, not one. There's no vitamin, no mineral, no amino acid, no protein, no carbohydrate of any kind that we put into the human body that's used in the format that we put it in. Without a single exception, everything that enters our body has to be refined into the usable form. It goes
Even salt?
Even salt, yeah. Sodium chloride, NaCl, is not used in the sodium chloride form. It's actually broken. That molecule is broken down and put into different physiologic reactions. If you look at the way the mitochondria uses water, for example, it breaks off the hydrogens and it breaks off the oxygen. The oxygen goes into one side of the Krebs cycle. The hydrogens bind to NAD plus and reduce it to NADH, and then it enters the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. So everything that enters our body, you eat a piece of chicken, the chicken is useless until it's broken down into amino acids. You ingest folate or folic acid, it's useless until your body turns it into methylfolate. This process in human beings is called methylation. We do
the process of turning something into its constituent parts?
Yes, into its
usable form.
usable
Was marking DNA.
No. So methylation is also called one-carbon metabolism. So basically what methylation is, I liken it to pulling crude oil out of the ground, right? So we take crude oil out of the ground, but we can't put crude oil into our gas tank, right? Because the car doesn't understand that fuel source. Crude oil has to be refined into gasoline. Now the car can operate. Human beings are no different. We put all kinds of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, amino acids into the human body, and the human body takes them and converts them into the usable form. If you can't make this conversion, you have a deficiency. And it is this deficiency that is robbing us from being in a state of optimization. It's this deficiency that leads to some of the most common conditions that we call genetically inherited disease. The whole concept of genetically inherited disease is, in my opinion, such a fallacy. Yes, there are rare conditions that are true diseases that are passed from generation to generation. But why is it that 85% of all hypertension is idiopathic, meaning of unknown origin? And we say, well, Tom, your grandmother on your mom's side had hypertension. Your father and your grandfather had hypertension. Now you have hypertension. So you have familial hypertension. You have genetically inherited hypertension. If a doctor said that to me, I would say, well, what gene did I inherit that gave me that hypertension? Because they wouldn't be able to tell me, because that gene doesn't exist.
Okay, so I'll push on that one. So the gene might exist but not be known. It could be a confluence of 150 gene interactions, or it could be modern life. That was one of the big questions I want to ask you. So going through the research with you, that was the question I kept wondering, is this all like at a generic level for me, because I don't have the depth of medical knowledge that you have. But when I look at it, I'm just like, oh, we're out of step with how we came up from an evolutionary standpoint. There's just too many things that are off, like the fact that I never walk on the ground.
Right.
And so if nature has assumed, whoa, you're going to be in constant contact with the earth, and there's going to be whatever ion transfer, I don't know what's actually happening,
Right.
but whatever that is,
Grounding,
I can expect it to
Magnetic
happen.
transfer,
Right. And now that it's not happening, things just start to knock on. And there's 100 things like that. Like, hey, I didn't expect you to drink diet sodas because those did not exist from an evolutionary standpoint. And now any one soda doesn't matter, but it starts to build up. Exactly. Yeah. So is this a DNA thing that we need to understand? Like, hey, Tom, you have the MTHFR mutation and you're not processing folate correctly. Or is it just that modern life is so anathema to the way that we evolved that this really is about going back to the basics, like you said?
Well, I think, if in a perfect world, you'd go back to the basics, right? Sunlight, grounding, breath work, being in regular contact with the earth, not eating processed foods, eating whole foods. In fact, my whole theory on dieting is not vegan, vegetarian, keto, paleo, carnivore. It's a whole food diet, right? It's usually not the food itself. It's the distance from the food to the table. I just got censored all over Instagram for doing a whole post on seed oils. And I said that industrial processed seed oils were bad for you. And people just came out of the woodwork. Seed oils are not bad for you. And I said, well, listen, if you take a canola plant and you put it in a commercial press and it comes out gummy, and then you degum it with hexane, which is a known neurotoxin, and then you heat that oil to 405 degrees and turn it rancid, and then you take that rancid neurotoxic oil and you deodorize it with sodium hydroxide, which is a known carcinogen. Now it's toxic. Yeah, maybe the original cold pressed canola plant wasn't going to harm you, but it's the distance from there to your table, right? It's the industrial processing that harms you. But back to that process of methylation, you could go down the role of genetic science until your eyes roll back in your head. But there are 5 major genes of methylation: MTHFR, MTR, MTRR, one called AHCY, and one called COMT. If you got a genetic test and you looked at which, if any, of those genes were operating and which ones are not operating, whether they were broken or not, and you simply supplemented for their deficiency, my hypothesis is it would get you 85 to 90% of the way to where you want to be, and it would pull so many anchors up off of your stern, it would be absurd. Anxiety, anxiousness, ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, poor gut issues, poor sleep, waking mind, poor focus and concentration. These all come from a lack of very specific nutrients in your body. And most of us do not have a clean enough diet and a clean enough fuel sources like the water that we're drinking to get there without supplementation.